So there has been a tweet circulating around Twitter these past few weeks. It says simply, just a reminder that when Shakespeare was quarantined because of the plague, he wrote King Lear. Now others have pointed out that Isaac Newton discovered calculus during another quarantine situation and when an apple fell on his head. Now this is cool history to know. I found it interesting. But the original tweeter seemed to be sharing for reasons other than a fun, timely fact. She seemed to be suggesting that maybe we all could be a bit more like Shakespeare, rather than, binge watching Tiger King or Love is Blind on Netflix. Predictably, there were many reactions to this tweet. I think because probably like Shakespeare then, we are all trying to figure out exactly what we're supposed to be doing right now. We're asking, how do we spend our time? We're asking, how should we feel? We're asking, what kind of opportunities does this moment offer us that we should be taking advantage of? I think this is true across many different experiences. Whether we are working or not, whether we're able to stay at home or not, many of us feel the pressure to do something, to be productive, to use our creativity. If we're a doctor working at a hospital, we are told that we must show up like soldiers to a war. If we're a parent, we must be entertainer, provider, and teacher. If we're an artist or a creative, we should be writing or painting or growing our skills. If we're working from home, we must keep our work running just as smoothly as possible, as if nothing had ever happened. And if we're out of work, well, we really should have all the time we need then to find a job. I saw someone on Facebook post that quarantine had forced them to, quote, toss out their working theory that if only they had enough time, they would finally organize their home. It turns out from this poster's experience that it wasn't their lack of open schedule that was keeping them from organizing, but something else. The post was maybe lighthearted, but they seemed to suggest that it wasn't just that they didn't have enough time, but maybe there was something wrong with them, some fault or guilt that they should experience. Maybe they learned they were just a messy person, or maybe just a lazy one. I have spoken to so many people these past few weeks who feel like they just aren't doing enough and they feel bad about it. This pressure is real. I think it's especially acute for those of us living in New York City, which is a place of intense overachievement. I've seen this pattern developing, a pattern of people feeling guilty or ashamed by how productive they're feeling, while at the same time feeling burnt out and stressed. Often these are the same people working more than they ever have. Sometimes they are even working miracles, redesigning whole programs and systems to keep things afloat, like our teachers and educators. That quote about Shakespeare was innocent sounding, but what it suggests is not. It is the opposite of what we need right now. This is a time to be kind to ourselves, not to heap expectations higher on. It's true that Shakespeare wrote many of his greatest works while either surrounded by plagues or in reaction to them. But it is also true that Shakespeare probably wasn't stuck in a small studio apartment. It is also true that he probably wasn't cooking for himself or entertaining or educating his children while he was trying to write. He probably had someone else doing that for him. He probably wasn't worried about paying rent or losing his job or looking for a job. It is too easy to forget how different our time is from these past times. It's so easy to forget just how emotionally complex this moment that we are all living in is. We forget that our lives have been massively disrupted, that the disruption inherently causes us tremendous stress. Those with pets and children know this, and we adults are the exact same way. You change something, you disrupt something in our lives, We might not be aware of it immediately, but it will change our experience drastically and make things harder. We also forget that so many of our coping mechanisms, our systems of support, have vanished. Maybe we used to go out to eat when we needed a break, that favorite restaurant, that favorite coffee shop. Maybe we went to see a movie to unwind. Maybe we had a friend or a parent or sibling that we would visit and see and just hang out with. So many of our resiliency tools have been taken away. The habits we've developed to stay mentally and emotionally healthy are unavailable right now, even to those who have been the most resilient and thoughtful about developing those are still at a loss. And that takes a toll. Psychologist David Kessler, who wrote On Grief and Grieving with the famous Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, has spoken about this phenomenon and how so many of us are struggling with what he calls unnamed grief. It's a grief that says that our lives aren't going the way we thought they would in this moment. Grief at a loss of social relationships, at the isolation, at the loss of our normal lives, or the loss of what we thought our future few months would look like. It's a loss about our jobs or economic resources, or about worrying about the loss of lives of loved ones. We have to acknowledge that for us as human beings, no matter how competent, good at our jobs, good at life we are, these are tough emotional times. We might not even be aware of our own emotional reactions because we're moving from one crisis to crisis, stress to stress. But we know that science tells us the brain doesn't work well when it's under duress, when we're grieving, when we're in crisis mode. Our emotions are all messed up right now. And so, of course, it's hard to be productive. Of course, we're going to struggle to manage things. Now, a common cure for this is described as self-care, which is a bit of a buzzword these days. But I want to suggest to you today that the origins are actually quite radical, and the true meaning of that phrase is actually quite radical. It has its roots in the feminist movement as a way of actually reasserting a woman's right to control her own priorities, her labor, and her health. Audre Lorde, the great self-described Black, lesbian, mother, warrior, poet, was a leader in this movement. She wrote that, quote, "Caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare." We live in a world where our value as people is tied to our productivity, where those who are perceived as more successful matter more than those who are not. Americans already work more than their peers in industrialized countries. We have either been convinced or forced to believe that this is necessary and perhaps even a virtue. We are told we must prove ourselves all the time. Who benefits from this? Certainly our economic system benefits from this mentality. Certainly those who reap the profits from that economic system and our labor benefit from that mentality. But the average person certainly does not. You and I certainly do not. There is nothing noble about a system that forces people to work all the time. That's abuse. There's nothing virtuous about working yourself to pieces if the reward is just more work. There is nothing just about a system that forces you to give your whole life to survive. That's a form of slavery. True self-care is not indulgence. It's not escapism, and it's not laziness. It is a practice of freedom, a taking back of ourselves for ourselves. It is a recognizing that we are not our work or what we produce or how useful we might be to the economic system or our employers. True self-care is a reclamation of agency, a taking back of control so that we can decide what matters to us and reclaim ownership of the value of our labor. It is pushing back against a culture that insists that we must prove ourselves valuable or otherwise we deserve nothing. So I urge you to use this quarantine to practice this kind of self-care, the radical, liberating kind, the kind that refused to be used, the kind of self-care that gives you choice. Someone online pointed out, I think, the simple wisdom. They said, quote, "You aren't working from home. You are at your home during a crisis trying to work." That's a huge difference. And no matter what your life looks like now, whether you are working or hoping to work or trying to work, you are doing it during the most dangerous pandemic in 100 years, and what just happens if you are in New York City to be its global epicenter, possibly while trying to take care of children and your family all at the same time. That is no small feat. So be good to yourself. Be kind. Be as understanding and gentle to yourself as you would be to a loved one going through the same thing. Your spouse, your partner, your children, a parent. This is a hard time to be alive, let alone work and produce. Resist the shame and the pressure and the expectations. Let yourself rest in the present moment and breathe and take it in. Maybe it's just doing the